Now, without further delay, let's begin today's event, sponsored by GoMoxie and hosted by Digital Insurance. I would like to introduce your moderator for today, and that is Jim Erickson. Jim, you have the floor.
Thank you, Alicia. Hi, everybody. Hello. Welcome to our session today, wherever you are joining us from. My name is Jim Erickson, and I'm going to be a moderator, and I'm going to have a conversation today with our speaker. Just a quick note about me. I'm a longtime editorial director at Information Management Magazine. I work with Digital Insurance. Right these days, I work as a tech market consultant for a boutique marketing agency, technology marketing analyst agency, I should say, not marketing, and study the technology space. So I'm very interested today to hear from our speakers. You're going to be hearing today from Brent Hartman, who is Director of P&C Digital Product Management at USAA, pretty familiar name. And also you're going to hear from Tara Sporer, the Senior Vice President of Marketing at GoMoxie. I want to remind everybody today that our session is being recorded, and we're going to send you a link back to this recording as soon as we have that available. It might take a couple of days to get that out to you in case you want to share it or review it again. But I think you'll find today's session valuable, getting a little boots on the ground insight from somebody who works daily in our industry. Remind you also to please go ahead and submit your questions for the end. As we have time, we will answer your questions, and anything we don't get to today, we'll be sure to follow up with. So, again, thank you all for joining. We've got a nice crowd today, and I'm going to get us started. But first, we're going to hand things over to Tara Sporer from GoMoxie to introduce us today. Go ahead, Tara.
Hi, thanks, Jim. Thank you, Brent, so much for joining us here today. We're excited to have you on, and I see lots of attendees wanted to hear from you as well. So I just wanted to take a minute to share our experience and perspective at GoMoxie on, I know there's a lot of conversation going around at events and everywhere about customer expectations ever increasing, customers being busy, et cetera. But specifically, we wanted to talk about customers' expectation around providing a frictionless or effortless experience digitally and what that really means. And in the most simple terms, removing friction and effort from the customer journey, from our customer's journey, saves them time, and they value that. They have short attention spans, they have long task lists, and when we as a business make things harder for them to do, what we see is that they give up, they abandon, they just don't do it. And so in that environment where we're challenged by our customers to save them time, it really means reducing the effort and friction that it takes to get things done online. And specifically, we're talking about digitally today. So in the example below, Uber has saved me personally, and I think lots of us probably on the line, a ton of time. It's reduced the convenience of payment, and the access to the ride is obvious. What is maybe less obvious is that they now are they're anticipating what you might need and telling you in advance, hey, there's going to be a surge, so get your ride now. And that's the kind of guidance that we've come to expect from technology. Technology has allowed us to be guided, and that's the kind of thing that we now have the ability to do for our customers on our site because of all the data that we have. We can anticipate friction or hazards ahead, to use the Waze example, and reroute our customers to more convenient routes, to routes that require less effort and friction for them. So that's part of what we're going to talk about today. And I think the ability to do that proactively, guiding customers, staying 2 steps ahead of them is where we see a lot of results. And I want to just touch on that for a moment, because it's a win-win for our customer to save our customer money and time, and for the business to be able to achieve their KPIs and metrics is a rare circumstance of a win-win for customer and business. So I wanted to touch on some of the results that our customers are seeing by guiding their customers and anticipating their needs. They're increasing form and application submissions. They're decreasing repeat or unnecessary contacts while increasing overall customer engagement. And obviously, at the end of the day, increasing conversion rates has a direct impact on growth, which obviously is a key business driver. So with that, I know we have a poll question to get started, and I'll hand it back to Jim.
Great. Thanks, Tara. Very interesting. Okay, yeah, we're going to, right before we get to Brent here, just want to get a quick bit of input, so will help us level set a little bit today. If you could just answer this one question, and we'll get going. Do you have visibility into where your customers hesitate or struggle online? So that CX, that customer experience that Tara's talking about, Brent's going to be talking about today. Just quick yes or no on that, please, and hit the submit button. And we'll get going with Brent Hartman. And again, just to remember, we're going to record this session, and we will get you a link to the playback today. And don't forget to send us those questions. So, okay, we're going to say everybody has said yes or no, and hit the submit button. Where your customers hesitate or struggle online. I'm going to close the poll. And yes, okay. So I'm going to bring Brent Hartman, Director of the Digital Program Management at USAA, into the call here. Brent, looks like we have a fairly educated audience to get things started here. Do you think the industry, this reflects what you see in the industry?
I'm looking at the results. So about two-thirds are saying yes, that we know where. And I think, I believe so, right? So everything has come around. There's a lot more data centricity around, do we know where our people are struggling or hesitating? And, knowledge is that first step. And then it gets to, all right, how do we take that information and do something productive with it?
Right.
So we'll be able to talk a little bit more about how we're doing that in a couple slides here.
Sure. Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit. And seeing that, again, a heat map's one thing. Knowing what it is one thing, and knowing how to address it is a totally different thing. So before we get started, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about USAA and what your company and your clients look like.
Yeah, we're USAA. I think we're well known for being the insurance company where we're supporting fully the military and their eligible family members. So we have this added eligibility requirement for any of our financial products and services. So outside of just insurance, we also have investments, banking, and a suite of other products that are geared for the military community. That service that our service members provide and that their families provide on their behalf as well is really what drives us. So we're always looking for those opportunities to better protect those members as it's core to our mission. Some of the highlights and the numbers, they fluctuate, but we'll stick with the last published that was out there. We've got 13 million of those eligible members, military service members and their families that are part of our organization today. Across the range, we've got almost 51 million products that are making their lives more financially secure, and several tens of thousands of employees, working on how do we deliver this mission and across all of our channels. Today, we'll focus primarily on how we're advancing what we're doing in digital.
Great. Well, I know, whenever the TV's on, it seems I always see a USAA commercial, and I always think in the back of my head that people watching are wondering how come they can't participate. So I think it might be a good marketing angle for you guys to address your audience. So, okay, well, let's get into it a little bit. How have you optimized this member experience as things? I guess you're talking about growth. You got 13 million members. What's that experience look like, and what kind of steps did you take initially and along the way?
Yeah, I think one of the things I hear is, as you serve the military, it feels like a span of kind of one unit. But just like any other, business, there are different kinds of members that make up our membership, whether they're active duty, currently serving, whether they're deployed, whether they're retired. And so a lot of it comes down to understanding the member demographics in all of our military subsets and their family members. I think everybody should be well aware, you can't create a one-size-fits-all experience anymore, and you have to be listening to when members are telling you things that they might not be telling you, and find the appropriate ways to respond.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel perhaps that your audience might be a little bit more homogeneous than other audiences for different insurers, or are they pretty diverse?
No, they're very diverse.
Okay.
They have a common thread, but across the board, there's so many different variations in there that You have to look at, again, like I said, whether it's people who are actively serving, whether they're deployed or stateside, the way that they can interact with technology is different based on just their location sometimes. So knowing that for our core audience, and that extends and multiplies as we look at their eligible family members and the associates of the enterprise, it's just as robust of a populace as everybody else. It's just a subset that has a common military threat at some point in the background.
Okay, so you kind of set the stage there. It's not one size fits all. So why don't we move ahead to the next set of questions here for you. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the business drivers that prompted USAA to improve the member experience, and how does that fit into sort of the competitive industry landscape? Is it similar? Or I guess, but first maybe just tell us a little bit about some of those business drivers.
Yeah, absolutely. Our business driver, right? So we are a private company, and so our mission is to be the provider of choice for military and their families. So I know that that's different than some of our direct competitors, and where the work is kind of coming from. We all believe that we've got great products that are going to support our members or our customers as they come into our organization. For us, it's really driven by the mission to serve, because that is our common core with the folks that we work with, as well as who we do our day-to-day work to better support, and that's those military men and women who are serving our country. The other part that really helped shape us, and again, I think this is pretty well known and talked about in a lot of different things that we attend and listen to, is it's not just financial services or insurance competing against insurance anymore. Regardless of the digital experience that your members or customers are having anywhere on the web, they're bringing those expectations across their portfolio of products and interactions. So as technology is improving, as there are other digital disruptors, other technologies, I mean, for a long time it was Facebook, then it's Snapchat. Whatever it is, we're competing against that from an experience level, and members and just the general population have come to expect that regardless of where they're doing digital business, it's just as easy as some of these other places that they spend their time. Right, and I was mentioning, you guys seem to have a really strong marketing presence and brand awareness too, at least in my experience, just from seeing the name pop up again and again. So the expectations are already pretty baked in with this audience. But I suppose really for any provider now who wants to compete, whether it's with you or with others, that it's really sort of independent of that. Yeah, I mean, there's a limited capacity there, right? So there's a finite number of people that are out there, and so it is competitive. And I think that's where, regardless of the industries you're competing in, everybody is constantly trying to raise their game, because if you're not, you'll get left behind, and then you're not able to provide any of what you offer to your members or your customers. Right. So like everybody, you build a good-looking interface, you create a good, an attractive and accessible kind of thing. I guess I'd like to know a little bit about how you determine where the member experience, needs to be focused or needs to be enhanced. How do you manage that experience, sort of separate from just the viewing of your site? Yeah, the specificity there. So in our communities, right, we've got a lot of feedback. We have a large, our member service representatives who support members on the phone when they call in. They are a great source of information in terms of feedback, where members are struggling, the kinds of things they hear about on the phone that you don't often get a chance to listen to in digital. So we take that feedback from our MSR community and we combine it with the analytics where, we're able to see where are people's friction points as they're going through our applications. And you can use those two sets of data to create pretty robust hypotheses about what do we think the real problem is in the digital experience, and then what tools or technologies do we have that we can put solutions in place and see if those are helping move the needle in terms of the number of members we can protect.
Right. So you're talking about multi-channel interaction. So you have, I guess, traditionally folks were used to operating over the phone. Now the expectation is they'll be able to handle all this stuff online. Do you think those things, and you're using that as a feedback mechanism, as you just described, whether people call in and say, "Oh, I'm having a problem online," or whether they're online and then they interact and then they ask about how aligned do you think those channels need to be, or do you?
They have to work together. So I believe that in other industries there is a big shift to be purely digital. I think what we're seeing and learning is, the insurance products are complex. So part of it is how do you make them more understandable and less complex. But they're big decisions. And so it's not always about, making it the fastest experience. You have to balance that with the ability to provide the right information so that when someone's coming through to acquire one of your products and become protected by what you're offering, they understand what they're getting and they're not. And with the complexity of insurance products and how they've historically been talked about, it's why there's been a heavy focus in the past on agents and just that ability to talk to someone. And so those places where people continue to call and talk and are looking for that personal interaction, we're trying to figure out how do we take that human touch and get it into the digital channels, not to remove the human from the equation when necessary, but to make that speed of the transaction and the confidence that the member has as they're going through on their own, as a lot of folks like to do. We want to give them the confidence that they need to feel good about the choices they're making. Yeah,
and so like you mentioned, some of these things require a detailed questions given the complexity of some of these policies. So I'm sure the top inquiry is a claim inquiry or something like that. Is your goal to sort of to give people the ability or the opportunity or the requirement to manage those things online, or just support a multi-channel kind of thing? What's your goal for engagement? Is it to migrate your customers or to serve them any way they want?
To serve them any way they want. And we see people migrate because they have to. And I think where the industry's got to go and where the experience world is going is you want them to migrate when they need to. Not because there wasn't a capability or something short in the experience, but it was just a point where it requires that human touch that I don't know that we'll ever get 100% away from, nor that we would want that as a society, let alone an insurance company.
Yeah, hard to tell sometimes. But you mentioned those expectations online, so you have some very high-touch customers that are used to this. How do you sort of get that experience to move on to the digital world? Oh, I see. We look like we jumped ahead to a poll question. I'm going to get this done first, and then I'll get to that question. Go ahead and advance it back to that poll question. We'll do this now, and then we'll get back to that high-touch customer thing. This is our other question for you today. We're not going to plague you with any more than this, but if you could answer this to help us, again, sort of level set out there in the audience, how proactive are you today with your digital customer engagement? So would you say you're very proactive? Are you somewhat proactive, or are you not proactive yet? We know transformation is a big topic with everybody, but just get a poll, and I'll let it sit there for just a minute, and then I'll close it, and we'll carry on with our conversation here with Brent. Again, ask those questions. Shoot us some questions on the side. We'll try to answer them at the end. I think we'll have some time left for that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and see where folks out there stand with their digital customer engagement. Okay, it's kind of this sort of most of these folks are saying they're somewhat proactive. I wouldn't expect anybody to say they're completely proactive. The industry is definitely transitioning. Brent, how do you see this landscape? Is that about what you would expect?
I believe everybody's working towards it. We watch the trends come, and everybody's well aware that it's got to be a part of the business strategy going forward, right? Where are people struggling, and how are you helping them? Everybody will talk, and I think we'll talk in a little bit about how you balance, are we being intrusive? So there's the stories and the visual analytics, depending on, some of the other softwares that people use, where if you're serving a how can I help you, 5 seconds after someone lands on a page, you see, 90-something% of people just close out of that because they're not ready. And
Yep.
so it's finding that balance of where are the struggle points and how are we prepared to be proactive in all the places that make sense without being intrusive as members or customers are going through their applications.
Yeah, so sorry I got ahead with that ahead of the poll there, because this information is really helpful to sort of set the stage for this. Talking about being proactive, I mean that subject unto itself. How do you what's the right way to anticipate things, or how much of that should you try to do? How do you avoid putting people off and having them unplug and saying that's not what I'm here for, that kind of thing?
Like I said, it is much more of an art than a science, although we're trying to bring the science to it in terms of the data and analytics that accompany kind of the iterations as we make our progress through our proactive touches. There are key points where someone's going to struggle, and so there is a saying from years ago, and I think it was in the How to Win Friends and Influence People book, but it basically was that once I did wrong, I got it backwards. Twice I did right, that I heard never. Once I did wrong, that I heard ever.
Okay.
And what we're like, I laugh with it, but what it means, and the reason I bring it up is you could pick up on every single thing that someone goes directly off your happy path line for, and then you're going to give them all the things they've done wrong, as opposed to finding the one or two things that are worth the investment in that proactive communication, where it either helps members and customers feel like they have the information and the confidence they need to proceed. Otherwise, you are going to overwhelm them because you've just got someone kind of constantly chipping in your ear versus giving you the guidance as needed based on what you're doing, not based on what everybody is doing.
Right. And so many of these things, like, you have this combination of human and automated processes, and more it seems like humans are sent in to manage the exceptions of more and more automated processes. So how do you know where to draw that line? How do you know when you're going to guide a customer? How are you able to engage your members without stepping in and interrupting them?
Yeah, we look for where the highest opportunities are in terms of those struggle points. So the digital data I mentioned, so understanding your web analytics, where people are getting stuck or pausing, you're able to see kind of where people spin within the applications with our current technologies. Okay. And then you partner that with the feedback of what your team members on the phones are hearing when they have that conversation. So the example on screen talks about liability insurance, and we get it. So renter's insurance from a personal lines is pretty straightforward. But customers, members walk in to get an apartment, and a lot of landlords require insurance. Well, one of the things that is different landlords will require high liability amounts. And if people are confused about the difference between liability and personal belongings coverage, they end up with a policy that's inappropriate. And so that's one example of just like where you saw what your people on the phones are saying, those conversations that you can hear, and then when you match that up with the data that says how many times are people kind of making this mistake digitally, you understand like this is a spot we want to go help people. There's enough importance there. It's a big enough impact without being too intrusive to help get them where they want to go.
So are you saying organizations should collect data from their customer interactions and use that in their digital developments, or is that something you guys do, or can you talk about that? I don't even know if you can.
I would just plainly say yes. I think where we're going and the need to use data, understand what it's telling you, and then build your hypotheses on it. It's core to kind of any digital improvement, iterations on your digital experiences across any industry. So very, very distinctly, I would be a yes.
Okay, sure. Okay. And again, a lot of times some of these processes get caught between, I guess, marketing and customer service. You have to balance all that in your organization in terms of the goals and, the aims of what everybody's trying to do. But I'm pretty sure everybody's going to put the customer experience first regardless. How do you enable a cost-effective member experience can reach more folks at scale? How can you grow this and build it out?
Yeah, I think the name for that is distributed experiences. So most of the thoughts before was, every digital transaction was going to take place on your properties in the way that you orchestrated. I think what we've seen now is, people are looking for components of their experiences layered into spots where they make sense. So for certain things, we're not going to be able to distribute experiences into everywhere, but having the balance between the right kinds of, what you call it, like digital containment versus understanding, when you have to shift people over to go to your call center or to your agents, you want them to have kind of done as much as they can on their own, because that makes the next step that much more effective.
Right. And then you've also identified some of these repeatable issues like this renter's insurance thing you just described here, and so you're able to sort of build that. Is that part of that process?
Correct. And then if you can answer the questions that used to stop people or have them confused, you're able to build some of that containment in the right way. And it's definitely not a cost-saving exercise all the time, right? It's about getting people the right information. So I know that there's usually a benefit of, channel containment in terms of reduced costs elsewhere, but we think of it more of a way where, members want to remain in the channel of their choice. And if they're looking for information or getting stuck in places or making decisions that could hurt them down the stream, those are those key points that we want to be listening and responding to, just as if they were talking to a person.
Well, of course, yeah. I think that would certainly be the aim. Okay, well, how do you know these things are working? How do you determine the success of this experience? What do you have KPIs, or what's your methodology for seeing how well you're doing?
Yeah, it's definitely the KPIs within each of the lines of business or the products where we're running different amounts of proactive. For us, it's how many members are we protected for some of them, and how many members are better educated. That one is harder to measure. But given our mission at its core, it's not just about all of the product. It's about protecting the member, and sometimes it's the education that they get from having that digital conversation that makes a difference.
Yeah, and this is got to have probably got a lot of soft benefits that are hard to measure. This is more about service than conversions, right? I mean, this is about having people say, "Oh, I use that. It's great. I'm going to go back and ask them something else."
Yeah, it's both, right? I mean, we have to be honest that there has to be a component of, what comes on after the experience is the ability to protect people with the products and services that are offered. But it's the education, and as more people get more educated around insurance, we're prohibiting those mistakes. It actually makes the whole insurance product suite stronger, because there's less confusion when things do come to the negative side, which means that there has to be a servicing or a claims aspect tied to some of these. And so we've seen how we're working through how do you measure the connection from people who got this education, got these touch points during the digital flow. Is there any correlation downstream when they have an event? Is there any difference in their reaction, what they thought they had versus what they didn't? I believe most of the folks on the phone would agree with me that a lot of that confusion comes out because people didn't always know what they got, and that's the big part of the education component that comes secondary. But, as we're working through it and trying to make sure our members have the right experience, we've got to keep them engaged with the right information at the right time.
Right, and it's always been hard to measure that. I mean, 50 years ago it was hard to measure. Now, I guess at least you could say you can put your arms around some things and quantify some of these things and try and get some better alignment with your goals. Okay. Well, we're going to ask one or two more questions of Brent, and then we're going to get to some audience questions. So I guess we're going to move ahead and ask you sort of. I guess a lot of organizations out there are trying similar things, or trying to, cut down bottlenecks and speed some workflows and approvals, things like that. What lessons learned can you share on innovating the online member experience out there?
Yeah, I mean, we asked the poll question at the beginning around, do you have visibility to where people struggle? And I think the first part of that is making sure that everybody can answer that yes. And to me, that's a big part of know your data, right? And you have to have strong digital analytics. You have to understand the feedback coming from your different channels to create those meaningful hypotheses about where people are struggling and how you can improve the customer experience. But the second piece is you just have to pick a place to start. So we know with the large amounts of data, you can end up in that analysis paralysis, but it takes some of that courage if you're going to start something new or go after a different capability to pick a place to start and test it. And as you're doing it, you have to do it in a meaningful way where you can quantify the impact of the changes you've made. And then that starts to, create more desire for it. You're able to show ROI and validate that this is something we want to do more of. And I mentioned before, digital optimization. So it spent a lot of time working on other forms of optimization within our experiences, from optimization testing, either A/B to MVT to surveys and polls. Like, you're capturing that information and then you have to act on it. So every time we take a step forward, we're working to take those small steps. And we know it's not going to get perfect the first time, the second time, the fifth time, but those incremental wins over time in your existing experiences certainly add up. And then as you're doing larger initiatives, just like anything else, you take those things that you've learned and they become insights that drive your strategy and your future implementations as you make more transformational efforts. So for us, we've learned from this, what those struggle points are, and as we're embarking on larger scale projects, these learnings are feeding in and supplementing things that we learn from, whether it's focus groups or surveys. We have a robust set of data that can bring some quantification to that, what is typically a more qualitative part as we look at some of the theories around customer experience and why we make the choices we do. Yeah.
Do you think, just the last thing before we get to audience questions, do you think this is pretty universal, some of that advice? I mean, I really get what you say, especially I really love that term, meaningful hypotheses. I think that really describes a lot of the process, things we want to do more of that follow from that, avoiding the kind of analysis paralysis that, I see so often when I work a lot in business intelligence initiatives and reporting initiatives, and the fact that folks see things and then they hesitate to do things, or they hesitate to do things and then they see things. So would you say that the whole, there's probably nobody that's doing this just right now, but would you say we're sort of early on in the steps with the industry, or midway in this digital transformation?
I think based on how the people attending today answered, we're midway, probably on the right side of that curve. There's a lot of way to go, and I think I know you said to get it right, but in all honesty, for us, that's the fallacy. It's never going to get to done, and so part of this is just planning on those constant cycles of iterating and improving in today's environment is what we have to do. So to answer your question, is it general? Yes, it's just that, we see, especially with some of the compliance and the heightened regulations around our industry, it's sometimes harder to start, and it takes some of that extra effort. But if anybody isn't doing those things, then I think they've got room to improve.
Okay. Great. All right. Well, let's jump to some audience questions. Thank you all for bearing with us today and answering our polls. Remind you again, you can still throw some questions in, and we'll try to follow up with you, anything we don't get to today here, and we will send you a link to this recording when we have that available. So, okay, first thing I have here: how have you evolved the experience and position guidance over time? I guess that's maybe sort of, have you kind of gone through phases on that, or how did you build this program out?
Yeah, I think it ties a little bit to what I was just talking to. Is we started small, we picked a spot, started small, and then we've made our iterations kind of from that. And every time we make a change, I think one of the things that everybody should be paying attention to is, how does it impact your KPIs? So however you're calculating, whether it's funnel conversion rates, whatever your KPIs for your flows or your applications, your experiences are, having a really strong measurement and post-implementation plan is key to being able to build it, because that gives you the proof that it's working. I'll share anecdotally, there are always people who are like, well, it's in the way, or it's annoying if you just pop something up. Well, it can be, but when the data is showing that it's making a positive improvement for the people who are experiencing with it, that's the way that you combat the bias of, well, it's just in the way. So again, to me, it comes back to data and being able to quantify the changes that you're making favorably, and in some cases not favorably, in which case then you go a different direction. Okay,
good enough. Next question is how often do you evaluate the digital experience? So do you have a cycle on this, or is it sort of as it goes?
We have team members who are watching the performance, day to day. So we've got a lot of automated systems and processes as well. But it's part of the day to day of some of our digital product managers, and it's part of their experiences that they own. So guidance, once implemented, becomes part of that, and it's day to day with all of their other KPIs.
Okay, great. Tell us a little bit about how you leverage developers and IT to adjust. Is there a lot of back and forth, or is something you guys can manage? How easy is that for you? For your customer-facing people, I should say.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward for our folks to manage it. Most of our minor changes are made outside of a dev and IT environment, and that's based on the capability we use and how it's implemented. I think just like anything else, when you're doing larger changes or doing something for the first time, those partners are key to making sure people can get all the way through. And so there's definitely a level of coordination, but the bulk of the work doesn't fall to IT today the way we've got the implementation.
Yeah, that's certainly the hope out there. I think it's less often true than not, but that's a good thing to hear from my experience. Certainly that's a lot of those delays and a lot of those development cycles. Okay, did you guys do an initial rollout? How long did it take to plan and deploy this strategy?
It was several months. I could say, looking back, I wish it would have been quicker, but there was a lot of learning to integrate the technology and the capability. But what I will say is when it's done right and you're planning for how to scale as you start, each one of our implementations since it has gotten faster and cheaper.
Okay. And can I ask you when you started on this path?
We've been working for a little bit over 3 years now.
Oh, okay. All right, so not a real long track record, but certainly probably upscaling what you guys were doing before, certainly. Okay, next question coming in here. Can you tell us about any of the KPIs you measure?
I have to just a little bit high level. So when we're looking at the way people interact with the proactive, we're watching the volumes of how many times those things come up, as well as how members are engaging with them. Certain things you necessarily don't want engagement with, and other ones you do, so there's not a one-size-fits-all measurement. But part of it is the instrumentation. We chose to do it so that we could watch the downstream impact in a test and control environment of people who would have seen proactive versus those who didn't. And so I think the way you can help move the needle on how some people who might not want to try it is pick that spot and then work with your data and analytics partners, or if they're on your team or somewhere else, say, how do we do this to prove with statistical significance this is the outcome?
Right.
And to me, when you can get to here's what the data says, it can take some of those hardest of naysayers or the most people who said, no, that's not for us, and they see the value, and it's hard for them then not to get behind it.
Yeah. I mean, do you guys fall back on best practices? Do you develop those yourself, or do you source those from someplace else for trying to create these KPIs?
No, I mean, they're best practices. So every business, every different product is going to measure what success looks like differently. And so it's hard to get specific on what the KPIs are. But again, that's why I just say, as you're deploying this, or even as you're iterating through it, ensuring that you can be statistically significant and quantitative with your results, we found that to be the most important thing for growing and expanding what we're doing in terms of what we tackle with proactive.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we're going to we got a couple more questions, and then we'll send everybody on their day. Thanks again for staying with us. And Tara, you see Tara Sporer's picture there and the GoMoxie.com link. So any questions you have for her or for GoMoxie, you can chime in there. And Tara, you're welcome to jump in here if you feel like it. I got one or two more questions here. Here's somebody saying, again, here's this sort of on the fence thing. I like the concept of being proactive. How do you balance being intrusive? Who does that come down to? Who makes that decision of, you know what, we need to interject ourselves here? How does that get done?
Yeah, I feel like I'll repeat myself again and apologize if I'm missing the essence. But, there's the data speaks, right? And so there's always that difference between what people say and do. I'm not sure if everybody's background's on the phone, but if you've ever done large-scale usability studies and eye tracking tests, if you've ever watched them conducted when someone is moderating or narrating versus when someone's doing it themselves, you physically see differences occur in how people navigate through their flows, right? Because they're thinking about it differently when someone's asking them, why are they doing what they're doing? And so in the digital space, when you're watching the web analytics and you're seeing what people are doing, the behavior is different than when people are really thinking about it. And I know that might be a little bit of a abstract concept, but that's why I keep coming back to the data and analytics portion, because if you've got a strong analytics community and analytical support, you can walk into some of these sessions with senior leaders or whomever else and say, with 99.9% statistical certainty, what we did here is delivering X against these KPIs. And so regardless of where they've been before, you're using it to iterate through the growth, just like I think you would in terms of any other new product offering, new capability, and demonstrating the value of it. But it is definitely an art because certain flows, certain areas will require a little bit more hand-holding potentially or interaction than others. And so, again, you've got to look at each one of the places where you have proactive and be prepared to measure them independently. And, again, then you get into the why. And once you know the why, you can say, okay, maybe I don't need to be proactive here because I can address the core of where people are taking a misstep or having concerns somewhere else. And that goes back to, do you know your problems, your struggle points, and creating that really pure hypothesis. And you're not going to get the solution right the first time, but if you know you've really got that hypothesis right, it gives you can keep going back to that and say, okay, what's another approach on how to solve it? So very long-winded, I apologize for that, but it's definitely an art that we're working to bring the science to in more of a data and analytical way. Okay,
no, that's fair. It's a very iterative thing. I mean, as an analyst, I definitely like those charts you were talking about with a high probabilistic, information that says this does this. Of course, it doesn't always work that way. But as you pointed out several times today, how iterative and knowing your company and your channels and your customers, it keeps coming back to the same things. Okay, last question for you today. Then, you talked about how you measured yourself and. Can you sort of give us a before and after in terms of prior to the proactive, movement there, how your customers were interacting or how they were getting help? Was it like a FAQ or how was that working?
Yeah, those are some of the other core KPIs that we've watched. So whether it was through engaging with chat, channel switching onto the phones, we had good benchmark data of how people had been moving within our applications. And so we were able to start with that. And then as we added proactive, we were able to see positive shifts in those metrics. So less people abandoning when people are switching, the conversations are more productive. And to us, it comes back to the guidance that's being provided is really creating more engagement. and then that engagement translates into the performance impacts that we're seeing. We also, we're watching for feedback through all other, tools. So whether it's social media listening or, other ways we collect data and information as members make their way through the site, we're always screening those for references to our proactive guidance, and we haven't seen anything come there as of yet, which goes back to some of the, how do you not get intrusive? We haven't seen feedback there that's negative.
Okay.
And part of that is, I think it's you've got to start and be good about where you want to go. If people went out and over-indexed on, I want to fix every problem, I think you would get to that intrusive, and then you'd cost yourself. So just like anything else right now, you've got to build up from the bottom deliberately, and then the challenge becomes how do you do that in as quick as possible iterations to prove business value while also making sure you're there to educate and protect your membership or your customers.
Yeah. Okay. I kind of lied. I got one more little question for you. We'll keep it kind of short, but a good one came in here. Any tips to transform the thinking of internal business leaders? I mean, I guess this gets to the sort of the managing up question. I've seen a lot of examples where there's resistance to change and people want to hold on to the old processes and services.
Yeah, that's always a tough one. I think it depends sometimes on just what they're stuck in. If you know where or kind of why they're resistant to it, then you can potentially position the data to do it. And just like anything else, I mean, you can go in with we want to test and learn. And part of it is it's not always the what does success look like. It's one of my personal favorites. I learned a long time ago, like your considered but not recommended section. So if things aren't going well, here's the pullback plan, and this is how we're going to monitor it. Because usually that's just I've experienced just not a concern or a fear, but a concern of the unknown. And so if you can be deliberate about what your plan would look like, how you would make that work, how you're going to make your decisions and get buy-in on the approach to try it, then it's not an all or nothing, and people feel like they can kind of, take a step in with you, and it's not a big jump.
Right.
I haven't ever seen big shifts in it, right? I think like anything else we're doing, and I've seen success in our digital spaces across the board is it's iterative, and very infrequently do you see a big swing in either an experience that goes perfectly or trying to change the thinking of other business leaders.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Brent. This has been a really enjoyable conversation. Really appreciate your sharing some of those insights and experiences with our audience today. We had a great audience today asking good questions. We will follow up with you, and appreciate all your efforts in staying with us. So also want to thank Tara Sporer today, GoMoxie SVP of Marketing. She's there at GoMoxie to answer your questions also. Brent Hartman, Director of Digital Program Management at USAA. Very helpful discussion. And with that, I'm going to wrap things up today. I'm Jim Erickson for Digital Insurance. Thanks again, all of you, for attending, and I hope you all have a great week. So long, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tara.
Thank you again to our attendees for joining us today. This does conclude today's conference. You may now disconnect.